You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week, we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week, we welcome autism coach and best-selling author Jennifer Cook to the podcast to talk with us about building relationships and fostering connections for those on the spectrum. You may recognize Jennifer from her role as a relationship consultant on the Emmy Award-winning Netflix series Love on the Spectrum, where she helped neurodivergent adults navigate the world of dating. Jennifer, we're thrilled to have you on today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be with you and get to talk about a whole lot of fun things.
Now, I'm excited only because I have two children myself, and quite frankly, the subject of relationships and dating, I feel like I'm out of tune. I've been off the market for 20 years, so I have no idea what we're going to be wading into here.
You probably know more than you think. I think when it comes down to it, the essentials haven't changed, except for add in social media. That's a whole nother can of worms.
Well, hopefully we get into that can of worms, but I did want to kind of set the stage because if I'm correct, is that you're neurodiverse yourself and were diagnosed later in life. How did that come about, and how did you explore that diagnosis, and did that change things for you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was diagnosed 11 years ago, and it was subsequent to, so I have three kids. And back in the day, it was, Asperger's syndrome. Now, obviously, we're all under the umbrella, which is a unifying thing and can bring so much strength. Back in the day, that's what it was. Like I said, I have three kids. Now they are 19, 16, and 13, but subtract 11, and we had some young folks. I've got a daughter and two sons, and my two eldest had been diagnosed with Asperger's, and I joke that if the third one had been neurotypical, I wouldn't have known what to do with them, at this point. But their dad was actually diagnosed just before I was, and then mine honestly was a matter of me going, my father had passed away not long before the kids were initially diagnosed, and there just seemed to be, so he was the classic absent-minded professor, absolutely brilliant, and socially, there were many guffaws, shall we say. So looking, back at my own life, I kind of thought there seemed to be some links genetically, and I wonder if that could be me. Went through the checklist, if you will, of the way autism presented, and noticed that a lot of them just couldn't apply to me because they seemed particularly male-centric, to be very honest. Just the simple things of I didn't have trains or trucks to line up and do things like that with, but I certainly made little tableau with my Barbies and prefer to do that instead of necessarily interacting and creating my own stories. A lot of times I would be mimicking the news, which was a little bit weird for a little kid, but that's what I did. So I went through all of the criteria, if you will, and looked at them and sort of said, okay, rather than just saying yes, 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 or no, this doesn't fit, let's look at and decide what was the need that was being served by this particular type of behavior that's being described. By doing that, it became a whole different story. The way I liken it now is, Jeff, if you had a can of soda and it's obviously, opaque and it's carbonated and perhaps dark, and I've got a bottle of water and it's plastic and transparent and clear, the beverages. Well, we've both got something that looks very differently. However, they're there to serve the same need. We both have thirst and need to quench our thirst. Well, it's the same thing. Boys and girls do things perhaps a little bit differently. And obviously we're talking about, cis boy, cis girl, gender assigned at birth, although it's been really interesting. That's a whole nother topic. How folks who are transgender have really seen themselves in a lot of the work that I've done on behalf of women and girls. So it's just neat. It's neat where nature and nurture intersect. It's just a really cool topic. But that being said, went through it and everything just kind of clicked. to the point where I actually put that together now. It's something called the checklist. It was in one of my books, and it's a free download too. We can talk about that at the end, but I think it's helped a lot of people be able to see themselves and identify themselves. Um, anyway, so brought it to the therapist that I was seeing at the time, who was helping me kind of navigate my kids' diagnoses. And, she said, that all makes perfect sense. And I think that makes sense that you were on the spectrum too. And for me, that was a great relief because it made so much of my life make sense. And if you think about it almost in a mathematical way, those icky if-then statements that you used to have to deal with in geometry or whatnot, it made sense in the way that if this was the case, then I wasn't insert adjective, negative adjective here that maybe I had heard growing up, or maybe I had felt and self-assigned growing up. So instead, it was this great sense of awareness, self-awareness. So it was a wonderful thing for me, and obviously it's changed the advocacy work that I had no intention of doing, and no intention of writing books, etc., has completely changed my world. So for me, it was one of the greatest moments of my own personal history.
Absolutely. And I would imagine that just the ability to sit back and self-reflect and be self-aware, despite the fact that autism is so broad in nature, it gives that second thought of, okay, so what's the experience of this individual and how does that relate to maybe some of the neurodivergence or some of the aspects of autism that
Mm-hmm.
that person is experiencing, and how do we work those things so that they become symbiotic in nature, is that they work together.
Absolutely.
I, so is I'm guessing that's what led you into the coaching, is that you went through this process and you realized that the relationship component is so difficult for all of us, let alone somebody who's trying to navigate social aspects. What were those pieces of, social awareness that you feel like, this is a commonality that we all kind of deal with that maybe are exaggerated if somebody has some social awareness differences or
Challenges. You
perspectives
know,
that change?
I love the way you phrased it. Yeah. So the odd thing is the coaching really didn't formally happen until after Love on the Spectrum, because there was such a demand. Really, what I started off with when my kids were young, I started off working with writing. The first thing had that happen was I wrote a book. Honestly, I wrote a book based on what I was doing with my kids, the teaching how I was teaching them. They were homeschooled at the time, or at least two of them were, and then Montessori based, and began kind of unraveling, if you will, the secret social rules. That's the second book that I wrote, and it sort of took off. Like the first talk that I ever gave was a keynote. I'm not sure how I stumbled all into it, and how we've gone from the books now there are 9 of them, and we're looking at 9 different languages. It's as diverse as a very adult memoir to a Sesame Street book. So they're kind of all over the place. But what I've kind of noticed above all, you're absolutely right. There are these secret social rules that, because really being neurodiverse means challenges with executive functioning in many ways, and also with mind blindness or theory of mind issues. And so the way, your listeners are probably familiar with these terms, but the way I describe mind blindness, and that is a term that I use anyway, is simply the idea that we don't organically step into somebody else's perspective. We have to learn to interpret what our tone sounds like, what our verbiage sounds like, how it's coming across. So when you're not doing that naturally, there are lots of pitfalls. And that was the second book that I wrote. Was basically, I started taking notes on these little social rules that were happening around me that I would never have paid attention to had I not been recently diagnosed. The first 2 books came within 1 year. And in doing that, it was real strange because like I said, I started taking notes and saying to people, you don't realize it, but that was a social rule. And again, back to that same therapist that I mentioned before, she said to me, have you really ought to turn this into a book. And I said, do you think anybody would read it? And this book itself has sold almost 100,000 copies. That tells you how unself-aware I guess I was, but how incredibly broad is the need to sort of make sense of the things that for a typically developing mind really, don't need to be so explicitly put out there. So,
No.
yeah.
When you kind of go through that and you're talking through, just even the theory of mind components behind it, as that the development of perspective, it's such a challenge. And I deal with this with my children as well. You might feel a certain way, you might experience something a certain way, but the person that you're communicating with or that you're engaging in a relationship with might
Yes.
be on a completely different plane. What are
Yeah.
some of these rules that you've outlined? Because obviously, if you're selling best-selling books, there is that need out there and people are seeking the information. What would be some of these rules that we can kind of dive into?
Sure. So some of the things are, a lot of people on the spectrum, because we tend to be a little bit black and white, I say anxiety is the nemesis of all things awesome, and certainly of all people awesome. And so being on the spectrum, anxiety is a major thing that so many of us are dealing with, which makes perfect sense because you've got sensory challenges that are coming in real time. And then when you're not reading things as they happen, or as other people are necessarily experiencing them, there are a lot of pitfalls. There are a lot of stub toes, if you will, emotionally. And so it makes sense that we would be very either or because we want to and rigid in our thinking. So one of the things I talk about, because we're trying to keep control over a situation and an experience that may not be within our control. So one of the things I talk about is being cooked or uncooked spaghetti, and that if somebody is, I kind of make up these little terms because you can then talk about, once you've explained it with with someone you care about, you can kind of throw in the, hey, uncooked spaghetti. And what that just simply means is being rigid and thinking, you take a handful of uncooked pasta, you try to break it or bend it, what's going to happen? It's going to snap, right? But with a little bit of time and warmth, you have this wonderful, flexible thinking. So things like that, understanding that anger is a Band-Aid emotion. It's literally, I've actually written on people's hands and made a little sad face underneath and then put the Band-Aid over that. Anger it's a secondary emotion that is being experienced that needs to be peeled off. It's real, you can see it, you experience it, but what actually needs to be healed is underneath. So talking about self-advocacy, talking about how you can speak your own feelings and challenge, how you're accepting criticism. The idea that you've got to be able to hold the pillow is a phrase that I use. It comes from a little experiment where I had seen one of my children's psychiatrists actually did this, and I love it. And so this is where hold the pillow comes from, is that basically she would have the child kind of stand there and take a little cushion from her pillow from her couch and throw it at my daughter. And my daughter, just sort of stood there and got bopped by this thing. She did it again, and this time, my daughter sort of like moved to the side because what's going on here? And the last time she caught it. And the doctor said, now I'm going to stop throwing pillows at you. And basically the idea was that as soon as you can hold on to something difficult, if once criticism happens, it's happening, even with the best of intent, in air quotes, right? But it's going to keep coming at you. Lessons are in life until you can literally hold on to the discomfort for just a second or two. But in doing that, you get to hear, you get to listen, you get to grow, but it does take just a moment of being able to tolerate discomfort. Things like knowing how to express your feelings, and how to reflect back. So it's I feel statements, and understanding that when we're starting conversations with you do this, you do that, that we're pointing fingers in a way that's only ever going to be detrimental to us. Or there's a lot of perfectionism out there, and understanding that when you go to watch a tightrope walker, right, there's that level of oh my gosh, is he or she going to fall? And nobody loves it when the person just goes right across. If they were to just prance across the wire, that's not very exciting to watch. But what we do love and cheer for is when there might be a little wobble here and there might be a little wobble there, but they keep it together and they're able to keep going. And so in the same way, doing things and being, or doing things perfectly and being perfect, first of all, of course, that's a goal that no one can achieve. But beyond that, You're off-putting in what we think is being endearing. I know for me, this was the case growing up. I was absolutely that overachieving perfectionist. And if I didn't get everything right, I felt like I was probably going to let my teacher down. That let down my identity was wrapped up in that. And I understood it that the other kids would expect me to be that way too. And so they would want me to be this, super excellent person, which is not, of course, what your peers actually want, because they don't want to feel condescended to. But for me, just learning that wobbling a little bit on the tightrope, and people cheer for you when you're human and they don't root against you. And so it's just a whole lot of things like that.
Yeah, I appreciate that you express that, because I think that oftentimes is that polarity of I'm either right or I'm wrong, or
Yep.
I either did it right or I excelled at something or I failed at something. It's
Yes.
it's a tough thing for everybody to go through, but if you're taught that from the
Yes.
beginning is that this is how you have to do it, it becomes even more challenging. Um,
Absolutely.
as you're doing your coaching on this, and right now coach me on this, because I'm going to have to help my own children, but as you're looking through it, I think that a lot of times right now is that children and adolescents, they don't learn the idea of relationships and dating
Yeah.
as that ability to kind of explore a relationship rather than it being this physical demonstration of a relationship.
Yeah.
And what is it that you coach people? Do you coach people to say, hey, you know what? Go out and date a variety of people and make it conversational. Learn about yourself, learn about them, and understand? Or are you more on, this is what a one-on-one relationship looks like when you're doing your coaching?
So it depends. It depends very much on the person who's coming to me, right? So I've got folks who are single and I've got folks who are in relationships. And, the above and beyond, though, really what it comes down to for all of them is it's the same skills in making and keeping friends. And we all know that for people on the spectrum, that first of all, making and keeping friends are two separate skills. But those can be challenging. And so it only follows through. I would liken dating to like leveling up on a game, in gaming, that what you're doing is really just becomes more intense, and more interdependent in a healthy way, obviously. But learning those same social skills, learning what sounds like interrogation, what sounds like cooperative conversation, what shows that you're actually listening, and how can you reflect that? How can you ask someone something that doesn't sound too, or when can you ask something that sounds personal, and when shouldn't you? What can you reveal about yourself, and what should you be feeling in certain moments of as a relationship progresses? So it's really interesting to see how truly, whether you are a kid learning to make friends, and keep them, because keeping them is usually a lot harder, or you're a teen or an adult looking to meet someone or are in a relationship that you want to continue. First of all, understanding that rejection is a part of life and it hurts, but almost always it's not personal. Has more to do with the dynamics than with you personally. And also trying to find some fun in the experience, which can be hard and scary. And let's face it, it's, small talk is difficult for everybody, in certain ways. And so understanding how that can work, and how to phrase what you really want to get out there. It's tough. It's tough, but learning that you can say things as simply as I'm nervous, or I'm not really sure what to say, or or how are you feeling about all this? It's okay to be vulnerable. You don't have to have it all together, which is a misconception that I find readily throughout the people that I'm working with.
That's the word that constantly was just flashing in my head, was vulnerable. It's
Yeah,
hard to be vulnerable, and
it is.
whether you've gone through life with a protective shield or with a bubble around you, or kind of just feeling like I can't expose myself because I haven't always been accepted, is that vulnerability probably increases. But you on the show Love on the Spectrum, is that you asked a really good question, and that was what it means to have a girlfriend or boyfriend. And your description there of having relationships, and even how I look at a lot of very successful marriages where your
Mhm.
spouse and partner is your best friend.
Yeah.
Um, what is it that you do to help people explore what they're looking for, and how to be able to start finding that? Because following a rule is different than really understanding your own desire at that time.
Absolutely. That being said, I think it's important that when you are learning about the quote unquote rules, right, that you ask the questions, why does this matter? Why, what does this, you know, people on the spectrum are often accused of being self-centered, and I don't think that's accurate at all. I think we're self-referenced. And I think that, it's essential to understand that when learning these quote unquote rules, you have to understand, if you will, what does that do for me? And, why does saying thank you? Why does, if eye contact's difficult, what can you do to kind of still meet a need that somebody else might have? And why does that matter? Um, Having a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a spouse, it's exactly what it should be. Should be your best friend. I know I feel very, very blessed that my husband and I have that kind of relationship. And I try to think back and, think what has worked for us so well, and that I can kind of put that out there for others. Because it is a complex, and nuanced growth. I think a lot of times what I do for the people who are single, who aren't even in a relationship and, are just looking to meet people, is talking about their own interests and talking about how they can develop the self-confidence that they are interesting. And generally, the way you're the most interesting is by showing your interest in someone else. But being more active in ways that you open up your own life to meeting other people. And then, you don't have to be the center of all things at all times if you don't want to be. Although, what a misconception that people on the spectrum aren't necessarily social. I mean, I was a social chair for my sorority. That tells you, like, it's literally the opposite of what you might guess, but yeah, so I think it's a matter of, when you're coming to understand yourself, it's really saying, okay, well, what more can I be doing? Not necessarily to be the perfect partner, because there's no such thing, but to be a more nuanced, deeply thinking, enriched human being. Because let's face it, that's the kind of person that people want to be around. There's two types of popular. There's the popular that intimidates everyone and causes unkindness, and then there's the popular that makes people feel good about themselves and about being around you, and you want to be around that kind of personality more. So the more that I can encourage people to maintain their true sense of self, but and at the same time, get out there into the world and try to broaden their horizons, try to meet more people, understanding that you may not meet your ideal person in this group or that group, but you might meet somebody who knows somebody who it's like exponential. It's right. It's hyperlinks this way and that way. And it will happen. It's just a matter of, when you are in your best place is when you're going to find the best kind of relationship.
I love that. And I mean, the fact that you're tackling this, it's been such a taboo discussion for, I mean, almost the entirety of, treatment for autism and neurodiversity. And I say treatment loosely here, but
Yeah, no.
it's never been researched to this point. It's never been looked at. It's never been the focus. The focus has always been remediation rather than trying to
Yeah.
teach these opportunity skills. And
Yes.
one of the things that kind of hits me is that as we talk through this, is that even when we try and be our best selves, and we're out there and we're like, and we might be thinking, oh, that person is wonderful, I really enjoy them. That might not be reciprocated all the
Yep.
time, and rejection occurs, and
It
that's
does.
got to be one of the skills that's tough and that you're working on. How do you work with people on moving forward after a rejection if vulnerability is the key issue in the beginning
Yeah.
anyways?
Yeah, resilience is tough stuff, right? And the ability to cope. We talked a little bit about holding the pillow. Learning to be able to tolerate discomfort for short term, knowing that it will end, knowing that there's more to come, and that sometimes what's being, if you will, thrown at you, it's not even personal. It has more to do with them, or whatever might be going on in their lives, or that the fit just isn't there. But that doesn't mean that you're not a good or attractive person. I think what I end up dealing with sometimes is, people's reaction. There's the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? So when people are feeling hurt, there's going to be that anger band-aid, perhaps. There might be the inward, the drawing inward and either a depressive reaction or a, self-flagellating, right? I do this so badly, I do that so badly, or I'm going to just people please everybody so that this never happens to me again. And none of those things are actually healthy. It's all, it really is learning about and dissecting. Okay, so instead of calling this person names because you're so angry, in private, or calling yourself names, what could we do in this moment? What can we learn from the interactions, and how can we put that, in your favor going forward?
No, and I think and it is a tough skill, and that's something that has to be learned not just in dating, but throughout all of life. And
Absolutely.
I would looking at kind of the approach that you've taken and the books that you've written is that you're empowering people, you're empowering children, you're empowering adults, you're giving them a playbook. Um, and I think that is extremely valuable because you have this other side of the world, which is social media and all these
Yeah,
social influences, which is probably teaching at times the opposite of what you
absolutely.
want for our children to learn. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, I mean, completely. There's Christina Aguilera just put out another a remix of one of her older songs, where she's got all the kids focusing on their phones. Again, my kids are in their teens now as well, and I see how toxic the world of social media can absolutely be. It's something that I have to engage in for work, and I loathe it. It's just because to me it feels so awkward to just say, all right, everyone look at me and here's what I'm doing. It's so, it and to try to be sincere. I worry in that, when I go back to that tightrope walking analogy, when folks are trying to put on a persona and trying to be this flawless perfect thing, they are not realizing that, of course, the face that everyone else puts forward is not their real, most authentic self either. And it can be so tragic too, in that communications that are based on snaps or tweets can be so volatile so fast. So I try to encourage as much as, and that is not to say that I think online connections are bad, because they're not. I think some of my best friends live literally across the globe, and I get to see them maybe once every 5-6 years, but connect through being online together. And so I think that it's important and essential to understand that dating apps, again, it's a swipe, it's swipe this way or swipe that way. That's not real reality. That's not a real person. That's not authenticity. But it is the way that some people meet nowadays. I certainly think the best way to do it is always through your own interests and through developing real relationships, which then you can keep up if online if you need to. But I think it really does come down to, again, that authenticity of developing your own interests so that you can feel confident in that you are interesting. It's so frequently that's what I'll get from folks I'll work with, is they genuinely don't think they're interesting. And I think part of that comes from the fact that with special interests being such a part of their own identity, that when they'll talk for long periods of time about, or the way I put it is taking up all the air in the room, right? When you're talking at sort of ad nauseum about your professorial subject, you're going to get a negative reaction from other people. Understanding why that is, and understanding that it's not perhaps the topic and it's not you, it's just the length and the how. Things like that, learning that that's going to get you a reaction that you're not going to be particularly happy with. There really are keys that you can learn, because of those reactions, the negative reactions to doing that. You'll find that a lot of folks think they're not interesting because they feel like they repel people. And I think it has more to do with, again, that mind blindness and understanding what you're putting out there, how it looks, because then it's a lot easier to make a tweak here, make a tweak there, not to who you are, but to possibly how you are in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, relationships, I mean, they're complicated. And
Ugh,
I mean,
yes.
when you have this, we're constantly banning social media and then reintroduce it under
Yeah.
different contexts in our house. So I mean,
I
I
know.
see
It's
like,
reality. Yes.
it's hard.
Yes.
But it's one of those things where it's very easy not to play a character, not be yourself, not trust that
Mhm.
you are that interesting person when you have this online persona.
Yeah.
And the the coaching that you have that's going out there to really explore who you are, own it, and kind of be able to kind of express that and
Yeah.
share your interests and be yourself, be vulnerable, share your fears, share your interests, share your
Yeah.
successes, everything that
Yeah.
becomes the package that creates dynamic relationships. And I appreciate the fact that that coaching is going on, but I also understand this isn't just for neurodiverse populations. I would
Yes.
imagine every one of your books would benefit almost every adolescent I know, and that's the normalcy to this.
Yes. That is what I feel fortunate enough to hear. And I think it's true, even when I'll talk to teachers, for instance, I'll give tips about, doing this in the classroom or that in the classroom. And I'll always say, what's maybe more essential for neurodivergent kids or adults, it only ever helps and benefits everybody, always, because it takes the time, it makes folks slow down a bit and take a little bit of time to really analyze what they're doing, what they're saying, and what's going on in real time. I think conversation happens so fast, reaction happens so fast. When we can, put a little brakes on the situation, you have better conversations. There's less overreactivity. There's less absolutes that get thrown in real time. So yeah, no, I concur. I think the lessons that are most essential for neurodivergent folks only ever benefit everybody else too.
Absolutely. Empathy, perspective, all of those things, all those
Yes.
characteristics that I hope that I can embolden in my own children are
Yeah.
things that I think probably just read through everything that you're putting out there. So, I mean, it is tough, and being a parent is tough right now. And for almost every single parent, especially for those with children who are neurodiverse, is that their number one goal is their child's happy and develop
Yeah.
meaningful relationships. So, what do you tell the parents, and how do you coach them on supporting their loved ones?
you know Being the role model is certainly, you got to live what you're saying, you got to practice what you're preaching, right? So I think that's the biggest one, is to take a good look in the mirror. And if you feel like you're maybe not communicating the best with your spouse, because it's hard to raise kids in general, add anything extra challenging to the equation, and or to the mix, and it's super duper hard, and that can be really hard on relationships. I think parents need to be able to find a way to give themselves some grace and some time within their own relationship, their own marriages, or whatever the partnerships. And so in that case, I think that, and especially when you'll have oftentimes one parent perhaps more understanding of what's going on and looking more to feeling more like the advocate, and the other, then there tends to be a but you're not, and it's a for against, and who's for and against, and it can create division pretty fast. So I think that's one of the biggest things that they can do for their kids, is to take care of themselves first, because that's what the kids are seeing and reacting to. And then I think it's an understanding. I think it's a matter of listening to adults on the spectrum, because the fact is that we and trusting themselves. The fact is, though, that that we kind of get it perhaps in a different way, and understanding your child, your teen, your adult child, doesn't matter. Understanding where they're coming from is only going to help you to advise them as they go forward. Because you're right, we all want our kids to be happy and healthy, but that looks differently for different people. And what are your goals? Understanding that the goals that you have for your child are not his or her goals necessarily. That we don't have many needs. We just want all want good for the kids, but what is good for the kids can be a little bit different when it's what they want versus what we want, and we can't control things that are we can't set goals that are outside of our control. That's only going to be self-defeating.
And I actually look at the clinical work the same way, is that you really have to look through the lens of what that individual is wanting. And the job of a clinician is to empower, it's to give the skills, is to help somebody to be able to get the ability to be able to open up whatever door they want. But I
Yes.
don't choose the doors. I don't
Right.
choose the path, is that somebody else has to be articulating that, whether that is the child, the adult, the adolescent, whoever it is.
Yeah.
I feel like, Jennifer, today we only scratched the surface, but you've done so much wonderful work out in the field. And I want to make sure that the audience has the ability to reach those tools. So where can people learn about the work that you've done?
Sure. So an easy way to find me is you can find me on Instagram. Like I said, I need to be more active, but I am on there and I respond very quickly to the messages, or my staff does. And that's just at Jennifer Cook Author. So it's pretty easy to find. The website it can be there's a link tree. So if you go to Instagram, you just click on the link in bio and it'll give you links to my website. It'll give you links to the download that I talked about, the checklist. It'll give you a link to coaching services and how to reach me about that. So, and to the books. So it's pretty much a one-stop shop to lead you here, there, or anywhere.
And before we step away, I personally, and maybe this is selfish of me, is I'd love to hear one of these stories of, the success that somebody has found where they've used the book, they've used the tools, they've used the guidance to understand who they are, what they want, and they've found that successful relationship. Do you have any of those stories to kind of leave us uh, just kind of in that good spirit of, this is going to work, and everybody has that opportunity at relationships?
Absolutely. So I think one of the best ones, honestly, happened to be captured on Love on the Spectrum. I think that for those who have watched the show, and I'll give a little bit of extra information because I know not everybody has, but there's a young woman named Abby who I got to meet. And Abby, I learned very quickly, her mind goes a million miles a minute. And Abby was I could sense that if Abby was going to have a successful, encounter, even first encounter, much less develop a relationship, that it was going to be necessary that she could slow down just enough to have a sincere interaction or conversation with someone. She knew how to ask questions, but then it would be another question, and then it would be another question, and they weren't necessarily related to each other. So one of the things that I did with Abby, and this is on camera, is I grabbed some ping pong balls and I rolled one ball after the other at her. And I said, what's your favorite color? What do you like to do? Where are you coming from? What do you like to study? And one after the other. And she said, that's a lot of questions. And I said, it sure is, Abby, but let's try something differently. And we just took one ping pong ball and we took turns. She would ask me a question, I responded to her question, asked her another one, and she responded to that, which I then responded to, and on and on and on. And we went only for about a minute. But I said to her, do you realize what you just did? You just had a full conversation. And the expression on her face was, just fantastic. She was so proud. And I said to her, can I shake your hand? Because it was a great and wonderful moment. And it was wonderful to see that as the series followed Abby, she did get to meet somebody who they had a real special connection over some of their special interests. And again, I say that is like the way to go if you can find. And it's over a year later and they're still together.
Oh, that's awesome. And as you're describing what Abby was kind of learning initially, I'm sitting back like, gosh, I should do that every once in a while too. It's a good kind of practice event to have. But
Yeah.
it's the fact that she carried that on to the relationship and
Yeah,
saw value in the skill. I mean, it shows that she was motivated
exactly.
to develop these relationships. And I think that's where you follow somebody's motivation and you get
100%.
there. So kudos to you. That was awesome.
Ah, thank you. It was fun. I kind of came up with it on the fly. So I was very glad it worked.
Well, Jennifer, thanks so much for coming on today. And I think that there's probably so much more that we could be diving into, and especially when you're looking at some of those differences, because one thing I'd love to bring you back on in the future to talk about is some of with the higher level of diagnostics occurring with women right now and with
Absolutely.
females, is understanding that dynamic and understanding
Mhm.
how society has shaped specific things which then become barriers for some neurodiverse women, and how they can challenge some of those norms and how they can work through it to be successful and within the society too.
Yeah.
So
It'd be
I'd
my
love to
pleasure.
have that in the future if we could.
Absolutely. It'd be my pleasure.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Jennifer. I appreciate you coming on today.
Absolutely. And best to all of your listeners.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like Autism Spectrum Disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.